Hello, my name's Jason. I'm from England, as you might be able to tell, and I live by the sea. I started using GDevelop about a month ago, and I struggled a little bit with the yarn dialogue system. I watched, I think, every tutorial on YouTube, and I still couldn't get it to work properly. But I eventually figured it out looking at the GDevelop examples, watching all the tutorials, reading the documentation. So I've actually managed to get it up and running, and I thought I would make an up-to-date yarn tutorial to help people who are stuck. Some of the problems I had with some of these older tutorials were text not appearing at all. And I figured out that that's because the way timers work has changed in GDevelop since those tutorials were made. Another problem, and something some commenters often asked about, was the final line of dialogue vanishing instantly, so the player doesn't have time to read it. So I'm going to be showing you how to fix that today as well. The only thing you need to do this tutorial is a basic platformer maybe, or a top-down game. Anything you've got up and running where you've got a player object and another object, because we're going to use the collision between the player object and the NPC object, or just a coloured square, whatever it might be, to trigger the dialogue. Once you've got your basic platformer up and running, there are 4 things you're going to need that are specific to the dialogue system. They are a dialogue background, which all your text is going to appear on top of. You're going to need 2 name tags for each of your characters. And lastly, you're going to need an options pointer, which is going to move up and down when the user presses up and down when they're choosing to reply during an options. I've chosen PNG for everything because it's nice and crisp and it supports transparency. If you want to follow along with me exactly so you end up with a similar result, try and stick to the sizes I put on screen and also name your things the same. Don't worry if you haven't got Photoshop, you can make graphics inside GDevelop itself using Piskel, which I use to create my Frodo and Trevor characters, the square people. There are plenty of videos on YouTube showing how that works and how to get those sort of basics up and running, so I won't go into that here. So I'll assume you've got those 4 graphics ready at those sizes, and we'll get started. The first thing we're going to do in GDevelop is create 2 global variables. And the first one is going to be called dialog state, and it's going to be a number, and it's going to start off at 0. And this is going to help us control what conversation should be launched. So the first time you speak to Trevor, this number is 0, and he'll say hello as if you're speaking to him for the first time. And we'll update this number in the events to change to 1, so that the next time you speak to him, this value is checked, and if it's 1, it launches a different dialogue, the one where he says, we only just spoke, why don't you go away? And a second global variable we're going to create is text scroll speed. And that's also going to be a number. And this is going to control how quickly your text appears. Now it's going to appear like the classic typewriter effect, 1 letter at a time, 1 character at a time. And we're going to pass values to this, sort of a character every half a second. And if you hold a button down, it'll be a character every 1/10 of a second. So it's the classic RPG style where you hold a button down and it goes faster. When you put both of these in, click apply. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to create all the objects that the dialog system uses. So firstly, we want a text object, and this is where most of the dialogue is going to be shown, and just call it dialogue. Size 20 is okay, we can always increase it later when we see it running, and you want it to be white text because it's going to be on a black background. It doesn't need behaviors or variables or anything else, it's just a rectangle that doesn't do a lot really. Click apply on that. The next one we need is another text box. This one, I can't type when I'm filming apparently. Dialog options, this one. And it's going to display any vertical lists, options lists, when they pop up in the conversation. It's useful here in this preview to type something on 2 lines, because later on we can use that to help us position the Batman pointer on the screen. And again, I'll show you what that looks like later. And it wants to be white as well, because again, it's on a black background. It doesn't need behaviors, variables, anything like that. It's just another simple thing. And then we need our background itself, and that's just going to be a sprite, and it's going to be called dialog background. Very imaginative naming here, I'm sure you agree. And it's going to just have the my dialog background PNG. And you don't need to name this animation. You don't need to apply any behaviors. Just click apply on that. The next thing we're going to do is the dialog options pointer, which is another sprite. And it's going to be called dialog options pointer. My names are getting longer and longer. It's like an essay. Again, just one animation, the Batman symbol. Don't need to name it. No behaviors, and so on. And lastly, and slightly more interestingly, is the name tag. Now that does have multiple animations. Leave the first one blank and call it none. It's actually important in this case that we name these, because Yarn is going to use these animation names to be able to select what animation, what graphic to show. Our second one is going to be called Frodo, and there we go. We'll stick that in there. And the last one is dinosaur loving Trevor. There we go. I'm really with him on the dinosaur thing. I have several in my flat. So we got none, Frodo, and Trevor, and no behaviors, and so on. And I will show you how Yarn picks between these, either showing nothing at all or the name tag as the conversation goes on. Click apply on that. So we've now got all our objects for our dialogue system. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to position our dialogue objects on the scene, and we're going to put them all on a unique layer called dialogue. I made it already, but I'll just show you making that. Just add a layer and call it dialogue. It's as simple as that. And we'll drag our first object on. Now this object will just automatically go onto the base layer, so we need to set it to dialogue layer. I'll just show you what happens though if you run the game with that on the base layer. It just gets treated like anything else, and it scrolls like the NPC and the ground. So what we want is we want it to be fixed like a UI element, so we put it on the dialogue layer, and then it will stay in place. It's not going to be affected by a camera or anything else like that. It's just going to be on top of everything. And we want to give it a Z order or Z order. I'll stick to Z of 1. And that just means that if you think of it like layers, everything else we put on top of it is going to be a Z order of 2, so it appears in front of it. If we put things at a Z order of 0, they would appear behind this black box. So this is Z order 1, and I'll position it exactly centrally here. If you're following along, this game is 800 by 600, and this being 600 wide means it's exactly in the middle at these values. And the next thing we're going to do is drag the dialogue on. I'm dragging it up here so I can see it, because if you drag it down here, which is the most intuitive thing to do, it vanishes because it's on the base layer by default. So drag it up here somewhere you can see it, and then you can fiddle around from there. We're going to be Z order 2, as is everything else, so it appears in front of this, and we want it on our dialogue layer so it doesn't go scrolling off the screen where we can't see it. And the values I've got for my text box here is 121x and 464y. And then down here you need to decide how wide you want your text to scroll before it wraps to the line underneath. So if you've got a long sentence written in Yarn and it gets to the end of this line, the sentence will wrap underneath, just like a word processor. So you can control that by enlarging this shape. You can drag it down as well if you like to get a feel for how big it is, but it will work even if you leave it like that. Right, now the next thing is the dialog options. Again, we'll drag it up here, and that'll be a Z order of 2 again, and we want it on our dialog layer, and the position for it is 182 on the X and 497Y. And see what I mean when I said earlier about it's handy to put 2 lines of text in that preview? That can help you position your graphical pointer so that you can get the X and Y values. And the next thing we're going to do is drag the pointer on, and again we want that Z order 2, same as the texts. It could be higher, but it's just tidy, keep them all on the same one. And the dialog layer, and I've got the position for the first option, which is 140x and 504. So there you go, it lines up with that option 1. But if you're making your own game, you could, think, oh, okay, what's the X and Y of option 2? Oh, I've got that, great. And you can use these numbers in your events to position this. I would just put it back. Oh, well, maybe put it back a bit too far. There we go. Right. And lastly, we're going to drag the name tag on. And because the animation 0 has got nothing in it, it displays like this, as if you've kind of mucked up, but you haven't. You can put the animation here just to help you position things, and then put it back to 0 in a minute. It's going to be hidden anyway in our events, so the player won't see it until dialogue happens. So it doesn't really matter. So that's going to be Z order 2 and the dialogue layer again, and I'm going to position it at 117x and 416. There we go. And then, yeah, like I say, you can change that back to animation 0 if you want to. So we're starting to get a feel for what it's going to look like, but at the moment, of course, it doesn't do anything. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the events so that stuff actually happens. Right, over in our events, the first event we're going to do is we're going to hide all those objects on the scene. So right when the scene first loads, one of the first things the game will do is hide all these objects, and so they're hidden until future events unhide them, show them. So at the beginning of the scene, so again, like I say, these things here will happen as soon as the scene is loaded, and they will happen once. So we will hide our dialogue. We will hide our dialogue options. You can copy paste this and make it a little quicker. Dialogue options pointer, and dialogue background. So there we go. At the beginning of the scene, hide all these things. So if we preview it, there we go. They haven't disappeared. They've just been hidden, and there will be future events that will bring them back. The last thing we're going to do in this beginning of the scene is we're going to load the dialogue tree from a JSON file, which is a JSON file is the JSON file is where all our dialogue will be stored. Now we don't have one already, and so we're going to create one. In my case, it's suggesting this because I had one before, but we're going to create one from scratch. So click on create, edit a dialogue tree with Yarn, and here we are in the Yarn editor. We just changed the name of the JSON file to dialogue. And here we are. This is a node. Nodes are where all your dialogue is stored. If you hold the Alt key and click and drag on an empty area, you can drag around, which is useful when you've got lots of nodes. To get into the node, to edit it, you double click it. And this is the name of the node, and we will use the name of the node in GDevelop to start this conversation. So you want to think about these names, especially if you've got lots of dialogue. You've got 50 nodes, for example, so you're going to want to give them helpful names that will help you. In this case, I'm just going to call it first. And And then the first thing we're going to do in the actual sort of text editor is we're going to do this name tag command. And this is a yarn command. This isn't a GDevelop command. And by typing it here, name tag, we've created it. So the name is the command is name tag, and we're going to pass it one value, which is the name of the animation. I'll explain the events later that use this, but for now just type that in, and then this will be the first thing that is said, hello. Now each line here will appear individually in your text, in your dialog box in your game. So hello will appear on screen, and then the user might press the A button on a controller, and then the hello will disappear, and then they'll see the next line of dialogue. So we're going to just copy paste that and change this to Trevor, because now Trevor's going to speak. Yarn reads this top to bottom, so just like any kind of script. So this is what Trevor's going to say. Hello, I am fascinated by dinosaurs. I have several Stegosaurus and Diplodocus plushies. You don't have to type all this. You can just type sod off or something if you want, and get through this quicker. But I'm just showing you exactly what I did. So, and the user would press X, and that sentence would disappear, and it will be replaced with, do you like dinosaurs too? And then we get into our first options. Now you can type it manually, or you can use this button, and it gives you the syntax already. I don't know why it inserts these grey characters here. You can just delete those because they'll just appear on screen as normal characters. There might be some clever reason they're there, but I just delete them. You don't need them. Now in the first part of this little block here, you want to type what your option is. So I share your love of extinct reptiles is that one. And then to the right of this bar, which you can type manually by, in the bottom left of your keyboard, it's shift and backslash. Or is that forward slash? I know I would get them mixed up, but anyway, it's in the bottom left of your keyboard. Anyway, to the right of that symbol, you will type the name of the node that this option will take you to. And that will become clearer in a second. And we're just going to call it Dino. Now we need a second option. I'll just copy paste and overtype this. So I prefer exotic birds, and we'll change this to bird. And we're done. That's our first node. And to commit those changes, all you do is click away. Now you will notice it's created a node called Dino and a node called Bird, which we did here to the right of that bar. So the user won't see that. The user will see I share, I prefer. So here we go. We've got a Dino. If the user chooses I love dinosaurs, they go to this node, and this is where the conversation will continue. Set the name tag. You see the name tag will still be Trevor from the last node, but I think it's good housekeeping to set it here as well. I mean, if your dialogue gets more complex and you add new nodes and you add new lines, you might find that the wrong tag is being displayed. So it's just good housekeeping. Trevor's talking, so let's set the name tag to Trevor, and then he's going to say, perhaps we can be friends, and listen to the Jurassic Park theme tune on repeat. It's going to be a wonderful friendship. And then Frodo's final response to this. We changed the graphic, the little tag, to Frodo, and he says, yes please. I have so few friends. It's very, very sad, this. And again, we just click off, and that's that one set up. And then we want to choose what happens if the user selects I prefer exotic birds. So Trevor, I just pasted that because I had it in there already. Trevor says the first thing again. That's a shame. Our friendship has no future. Oh man, I've heard that just so many times in my life. Right. And Frodo responds very sadly to this. It's a tale of woe, this. I hope you're not all sitting at your keyboards crying. Probably crying at how long the video is. And saying how other people did a 5-minute video that showed the same things. Yes, well, I did those videos too, and they didn't work. So, I am saddened, goodbye. And that's that. Click away. So that's our first conversation with an option, one option. We need to create one more thing. And to create a new node, you just right click somewhere and it will appear. So this one isn't linked to any of those. This is going to be our second conversation when the player has had this conversation, finished this conversation, and then talked to Trevor a second time. He's going to have different things to say. He's not going to just repeat like a robot the same conversation like in some games. Oh dear. It's getting a bit spicy in here. I said I wouldn't criticize anyone else's videos. I wouldn't criticize any video games, but I've already seemed to be breaking my rules. No, but the reason a lot of these yarn tutorials didn't work is because they're older, not because people are, making mistakes. So there we go. I'm being kind. This is going to be called second. Because it's our second conversation. Why not? Again, you can call it whatever you like. And this is what Trevor's going to say when you speak to him a second time. So we want the name tag Trevor again. And we just spoke. I need time to think of new things to say. Oh, as my typing's improving again. And then Frodo is very sad about this because he doesn't have anyone else to talk to. He works from home, doesn't have a lot going on. It's very sad. I'm not projecting at all, but I'm lonely, is Frodo. It's very sad. He'll probably go for a walk on the beach on his own later in his lunch hour. Name tag Trevor, please leave. There we go. And that's our second conversation. That's how friendships typically go. Click off. And lovely, there we go. That is all the dialogue we need for this. And to commit it, you just click apply. And OK. So it loads this dialogue file at the beginning of the scene. It does it once, and then that is available. The dialogue within that is available to other events. Right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a couple of basic events that do things when dialogue is running and when dialogue is not running. So the first condition, dialogue is running. We want these things to happen, and we want to show our dialogue text object, and we want to show the dialogue background, because remember they're hidden from from the off, and they need to be shown. And one thing, extra thing we need to do is deactivate our player character's behaviour. Now Frodo's got a basic platformer behaviour built in to him, applied to him, and we don't want our character to be able to move left and right and jump and things when they're talking. So when dialogue is running, we deactivate our character's behaviour. Then we need to set an event for what happens when the dialogue is not running. So we can just paste that, but we want to invert it. So dialogue is not running, and you'll see that icon means that you've inverted the condition. So when the dialogue is not running and a key is pressed, I'm going to choose X here, but you can choose any key you want, or maybe you've got a controller set up and you want to press A, whatever. So it will check if the X key is pressed. I've just rearranged these. There's a reason I've rearranged them. I'll go into that a little bit later. But it will check if a key X is pressed and the dialog is not running. And this also means if the dialog has reached the end. You know, if you're looking at the final line in your dialog just before it disappears for good. So that covers that as well. And then you press X and that final line of dialog disappears. One other thing I want to do is check a timer, value of a scene timer. Now this timer doesn't exist yet, but don't worry about that. I'm going to explain that and set that all up a bit later on. Greater or equal to 0.5, which is half a second. Now what this actually does is it stops the final line of dialogue disappearing too quickly. All this functionality here is going to cover what happens when the dialogue isn't running, but it also covers what happens when you reach the end of your dialogue. So a timer will need to be half a second before you can press X and dismiss the box. And what this is going to do is it's going to prevent you from accidentally closing this final text box until you're ready, until you've read it. So if you're holding X from the previous line to make the text go faster, this gives you just a little window here where you could take your thumb off and keep that dialog box on screen. Hopefully that'll make a bit more sense later when I explain the timer, when we create the timer. But for now, just know these events cover what happens when dialogue is running, and these events cover what happens when it's not running, and at the very end of the dialogue, just before you finish the dialogue. And what we want to do is just hide a load of stuff again. So hide the dialogue and hide the dialogue background. And of course, we want to reactivate Frodo's behaviour. So when the dialogue isn't running, or when you reach the end of the dialogue, you get Frodo's controls back. He can move again and behave like a platform character does, and we hide these items again. One last thing we want to do when dialogue is not running is we want to set an animation or change the animation by name of name tag, and we want it set to none. So when dialogue is not running, or when we've reached the end of the current dialogue, the name tag changes to none, so you won't see it anymore. It'll change from Trevor or Frodo. What we're going to do next is tell GDevelop what to do when it encounters our name tag command that we set up in Yarn earlier. So you put it here. It was name tag. You need to spell it exactly the same case, and surround it with the quote marks. And when the name tag command is encountered, we want it to change the animation by name of our name tag. And we're going to use the value that's passed to it, the value that comes after the command. So in this case, dialog tree command parameter. And the parameter is going to be 0 because we count from 0 quite often in programming stuff, and because this command only has one parameter, that's 0, the 0 parameter. If it had several parameters, this might end up being 1 or 2, depending on what value you wanted to extract from it. So the animation is being set by the parameter, by our name, our animation name. So up till now, we haven't actually referenced a branch in our dialogue. All these conditions just involve dialogue generally, how we want all our dialogue to be handled. But now we're going to create an event that actually pulls in one of our dialogue branches. So exciting things will start happening. Key pressed. I like to start dialogue with a key press rather than just colliding with an NPC. I like to have the option of chatting or not. So you might just want to walk past them, not just launch dialogue straight away. So you have to press A, and then a value of a global variable will be checked as well, and that's our dialogue state variable. and we want to check whether it's 0 or not, and it will be. It'll be 0 because that's the value we've set from the beginning. And then we want to check that dialog is not running, because obviously if dialog's already running, you don't want it to be trying to launch dialog, you know. And then lastly, we're going to check for a collision between Frodo and Trevor. So there we go. And I mentioned earlier about the order of these things. It's about optimization and keeping your game running nicely. If I had this collision check at the top, my game would be checking 60 times a second or whatever your frame rate is. Every frame, the game would be checking to see if Frodo and Trevor were in collision with each other. And that's quite a heavy thing for an engine to be doing, especially if you've got lots and lots of collision checks happening. So you have to think about the order of your conditions here. And if you've got the game looking for a key press instead of looking for a collision, that's a lot lighter. It's a lot more of an optimized way to do it. So if you've got a big game and your game is running slowly, have a think about the order of your conditions. Are you getting your game to check for collisions every frame when it doesn't need to? In our case, it's going to check for a button press before it does anything else. When we press a button, it's going to check this value. And again, checking a variable is an easy thing for an engine to do relative to a collision anyway. It's going to check that the dialogue isn't already running, because then again, this just obviously you don't want to start having a chat when you're already having a chat. And the last thing it will do, the more demanding job it will do, is check for a collision. If all these things are true, it's going to do this. It's going to start this timer that I've been talking about. Maybe I'll try timer. I can never find things very quickly. Start or reset a timer. A scene timer, indeed. And we're going to call it scroll text. So there we go, and you see we've referenced scroll text there, but this is where we create it. You can't create a timer in a condition, because a condition is checking if certain things are true. So you can't create a timer when in something that's just saying is something true. You need to create a timer in an action. So this is where we create our timer, when you initiate dialogue with a character. And I found that older videos didn't have this. They didn't create the timer before they had conditions that checked the timer. And so that was breaking the whole thing. And people, well, myself and some commenters were saying, well, no text appears because this condition, well, not that one specifically, but later on, a condition that checks this timer won't be able to do anything because the timer doesn't exist. So this is really important. If you've been stuck with other tutorials, this might be why. You need to create your timer somewhere. And in my case, I'm creating it here. Then we're going to start dialogue from branch. And this is where we actually pull in the dialogue. So our first branch was called first. I'll just flick back to that to remind you. There we go. This is a branch, essentially. Well, this would be a branch, and this would be a branch, whichever one you go down, as far as I understand the terminology. This is also, well, not really a branch because it's just a single node, but it would be the start of another branch. Okay, I'll forget that. Didn't make any changes to it. So we want to start the branch first. If all these things are true. And what we're going to do when they talk to Trevor for the first time, we're going to change this variable to 1. So global value of a global variable dialog state, we're going to change it to 1. So it's a good idea to save. I haven't done that yet. And if we preview it now, you'll see that when you're in collision with Trevor, and you press A, our text objects appear. They still don't do anything because this text object is not pulling in our dialogue yet, but we're going to do that very soon. Now we're going to create another event for the second conversation, the second branch. So if we just paste it down here, and this is going to be pretty much the same, but it's going to launch that second conversation, the one where Trevor says we've spoken before, go away. So we need to check if the dialogue state variable, is 1 this time, and it will be because it gets changed here when you speak to him the first time. We don't need to check the variable here because there's no third conversation. The next thing we're going to do is actually put our dialogue in that text box. So we're going to start with dialogue line type. There we go, I got there in the end. Dialogue line type is text. We're going to put stuff in it. So modify the text of our dialogue text object equal to dialogue tree clipped line text. So there we go. So we're actually going to put something in our box now. So if we preview now, we will get the first letter of hello and then nothing else because we haven't set the rest of it up yet, but we're getting there. So you create a sub event for this, and this is going to check our timer. So value of our scene timer, which is called scroll text. It doesn't seem to offer autocomplete here, which is a shame because we've already created this timer, but so just double check that you're getting the name right. What I want to do is greater or equal to, and the time in seconds is going to be in one of our global variables that we changed earlier. So variables, global variables, value of a global variable, text scroll speed. So set that up. And we haven't actually got a number in there yet. It's at 0 at the moment, but we are going to be sorting that out soon. And in here, we're going to put scroll clipped text. This is that typewriter effect that's going to happen here. And we're going to reset our timer here as well. So what that means is every time a character is printed to the screen, it's going to kind of do this in a loop. It's going to put a character on the screen every time this is true. So a character on the screen every, I don't know, quarter of a second, however fast you want it to appear. So we're going to copy from somewhere, start or reset the timer. So there we go. So the timer gets reset every single character every time a character is produced on screen. Our next sub event is X key key released, and I'm going to use the X key throughout this. X key is released, and clipped text has completed scrolling. So what that means is that the line of text that you're currently seeing appear has fully appeared. It's fully formed on the screen. So, and we're just going to go to the next dialogue line. So it's going to check that the current line has fully formed on the screen, and you've released X or quickly tapped it, and you'll be able to go to the next line of the dialogue. So this is a system that is not going to automatically advance your dialogue because some people have different reading speeds. Some people might take longer. So I think having an X to skip to the next line is a good idea rather than just have it automatically scrolling ahead. I've definitely missed dialogue in the past in some games because it's too quick. Right, X key. Next one is X key is pressed. So we're just going to do key. So key pressed this time because key pressed and key released are different things. So when you press the X key, what we're going to do is we're going to change. No, we're not. Well, we are, but we're going to. It's hard to type and talk at the same time. Value of a global variable, text scroll speed equals 2. And we're going to put a number in here that controls the speed your text will appear if the X button is pressed, is held down, basically. So this is quite fast, this number. This is a seconds. This is a seconds value, and we're passing that into our text scroll speed. So, which feeds back into this, of course. So one more condition is X key pressed again, but we're going to invert this condition. So we're getting a lot out of our X key here. We've got X key is pressed, X key is released, X key is not pressed at all. So we're getting a lot out of one button press here, but I think it makes it easier to navigate when you don't have to think about different buttons for everything. So when the X key is not pressed, we're going to change the speed again of this. So 0.5. So in other words, if the player is just sitting back and reading the text appearing without rushing through it, it will appear at this speed. If the player is holding down the X button, the text will go faster. And this is checking those all the time. So scroll text, which will is our timer, is going to check against our current text scroll speed to see how fast or slow it is. And then this controls the characters appearing one by one. But so it's all working in a loop. And let's just try that out. Hello. Hello, I am fascinated by dinosaurs. So you see here, it's appearing at the speed we've set here. I'm not pressing anything to speed it up. So if we start it again, and I hold down X, there we go. Now I've still got my finger on X. If I lift my finger up, we're going to skip to the next line, but I could sort of hold it down briefly and then release my finger, all that stuff that you're kind of used to. The last thing we're going to do is tell GDevelop how we want options to be handled. So what we want to do is dialog line type. Dialogue-y. Line type is options this time, and when actually we want to invert this to start with. So when dialog type is not options, in other words, when an options list type interaction is not happening, we want to do stuff here. And what we want to do is we want to hide some things, just like at the beginning of the scene. But we want these things. We want to make sure that whenever an options list is not visible, that interaction is not happening, that you can't see these items. Otherwise they might end up stuck on the screen forever and everyone would be very depressed. Right, so when the options are not happening, we want to hide the options stuff. And we'll copy this event and paste it, and then we're going to invert this. And now we want to show these things. So when options are happening, we want to show the options stuff. And we're going to have some sub-events of this now. The first one is going to be key pressed. And I'm just going to put up for this one. That's going to be the up key, the up cursor key, the up arrow key on the keyboard. And you could choose any key you want, and indeed you could have up on your D-pad on your controller or something like that if you've got the controller extension plugged into your project. So when the up key is pressed, we want to select option by number, and the number is going to be 0. So when the up key is pressed, we're choosing the first option on our list. So again, this is 0 and this is 1. As is often the case in programming stuff. And we want to change the position of our Batman pointer when you press up. And by the way, I have no idea why I chose Batman. I have no idea. Excuse me. Yeah, maybe Warner Brothers will sue me or something for my video that 1.5 people are going to watch. but I just felt like it. Right, so we're going to change the position of that Batman symbol when you press up. So position of our pointer equals, on the X it's 140, and on the Y it is 504. And remember, we got those values earlier by mocking it up here. 140, 504, and we also found out by moving it down and lining it up carefully with this text what the second position would be. So there we go. I can copy this whole thing and paste it, but this next one is what happens when the button is down. We want to select the second option on the list, and we want the pointer to move down so it lines up with that second option. Right, that's nice easy things, those two. I wish everything was as easy in this. Although GDevelop is it's so much easier than I've tried Godot. I had a little look at Unity. I did some sort of Python programming stuff, which I enjoyed. I got along quite well with, but I get a bit confused when scripts get bigger and bigger and scripts are talking to other scripts. And yeah, I find this so much easier. But this is a form of programming. Now, key pressed again, and X. We're going to use the X key to confirm our choice. So when you've finished moving up and down, you've made your decision, you confirm it, confirm selected option with the X key. And again, it doesn't have to be X, it can be anything. And you see we've used X here, and we've also used X here, but they won't clash with each other because options type is running, not text type. So they won't clash with each other. The reason I used the A key to start the dialogue and then X for pretty much everything else is because I had a problem where if X starts the conversation, X also ends the conversation. So you could get trapped in this endless dialogue loop that you couldn't escape from because the X key was doing two things at once and trapping you in this dialogue. There may be a way of fixing that. Perhaps I could explore that in a second tutorial. But for now, I find it's easier just to have a separate key launch the dialogue and then another key to just skip through all the dialogue. Right, so X key is pressed, that confirms your dialogue choice, and then the very last subcondition we need is to actually populate our dialogue options text object with the vertical options list. So selected option has changed. We are going to modify our dialogue options text box equal to dialogue tree vertical options list. So a vertical options list is going to appear in our dialogue options text object, the one that's currently just got the word text twice in it. And now every tutorial I saw would put some characters in here, and this functions as your pointer. If you don't want to do a graphical pointer, you can just use a character in here. It can be anything, and this little sort of arrow, this is just a dash and a bracket, could be used as your up and down kind of pointer, but I just thought it looked more professional with a custom pointer, and that was something I really wanted to do. So if you're doing a graphical pointer, you just put double quotes here, don't put anything in between, not even a space. Let's see, if you put nothing in there at all, it produces an error because it's expecting a value. So just give it the double quotes. And oops, that's it. We have done it. So let's test it out. Preview. So we'll approach Trevor, press A to start, press X to go to the next line, hold X to make it go faster. Do you like dinosaurs too? And then the moment of truth, here we go. And we've got it, up and down. This behaviour where the line gets indented, I can't turn that off. That seems to be an extension, a dialogue extension thing that I can't do anything about. It's unfortunate because I would quite like the I share and the I prefer to line up with each other and always line up with each other. But it's not the end of the world. And maybe if somebody knows how to turn that behavior off, let me know in the comments, but I don't think it's possible. Anyway, so let's test it out. Shall we say I share your love of extinct reptiles? Press X. And here we go. Perhaps we can be friends and listen to the Jurassic Park theme tune on repeat. Yes, please. I have so few friends. And then I pressed X. Actually, I was holding X when that completed, which dismissed it. So now, the second time we talk to Trevor, hello. This is my mistake. You see, it's working, but it's not launching the right dialogue. So now, when you speak to him once and this value changes to 1, this checks for that value and launches the second branch. So let's try that again. And we can also check our second option as well. So here we go. Do you like dinosaurs? I prefer exotic birds. That's a shame. Our friendship has no future. So there we go. Our options are both working. The branches are going off in different directions. So we talked to him a second time, and it should this time. We just spoke. I need time to think of new things to say. So, but I'm lonely. Please leave. So there we go. So I made a little mistake there, but that was easy to fix. Here's a little sort of bonus bit of information, I suppose. In some of the videos I watch, actually all of the videos I watch, the final text box automatically disappears, and actually perhaps you want that behavior, so I'll just show you how to do that, but show you how to prevent it from disappearing too quickly. So if you want the final text to just disappear on its own, you just delete this. And to make sure that it stays on screen for a little while so that people can read it, you can change the value of this. So we could change it to 2 seconds, for example. So I'll show you what that does. So we talk to Trevor as usual and get through it quickly. Do you like dinosaurs? Yep. And this is the final line. And it disappears on its own after 2 seconds, and I didn't have to press X. And you could make it stay on screen for less time than that. Now, because I've removed the X button from this, it means we could use the X button to launch the dialogue, because you're not going to have a clash. Because if they both use X, you'll be finishing a dialogue and starting a dialogue with the same button, and you get trapped in this endless dialogue. But if you have the final box disappear on its own without a button press, then you can use X to start your dialogue, which means you're using X for everything pretty much, apart from your up and down with the options. So it's up to you. That's 2 different ways of doing it. I prefer to have all the text, including the last one, stay on screen till I'm ready to get rid of it. Now, one thing I forgot is in this event here, where you finish your dialogue, when you close your dialogue and dialogue's no longer running, this timer is still, at least as far as I understand, still ticking along in the background. And obviously we don't need that timer to be working anymore. So in this event, when dialogue isn't running, when you dismiss the last line of dialogue with X, we want to delete that timer, delete the scene timer, delete a scene timer, and it was called scroll text. So this again is just keeping your code tidy. When the timer isn't needed anymore, we delete it. One definitely final thing I'm going to talk about briefly is the trigger once condition, which is going to be useful here. Essentially, the whole time you've got the up button pressed, it's going to be doing this over and over again, once for every frame. So it doesn't matter how quickly you press this button, this is going to happen more than once. And in our preview, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong, and there isn't really, but it's good practice just to have these buttons registered once, and then it will do this once instead of over and over again. And we'll do it for the down as well. For some buttons, like these ones, where you press it and something happens just once and you take your finger off, a trigger once condition is a good idea. A good example I could give of something that happened to me the other day, I was mucking around with the inventory system that I'm working on, and I was spawning, creating an object on the scene when I pressed a button, and it didn't matter how quickly I pressed the button, it was spawning 10, 20 objects, which obviously was causing lots of problems. But Trigger once fixed that. It meant that when I press a button, the object gets created, and even if I carry on holding the button down because I'm really rubbish at typing or something, it's only going to spawn one object until I lift my finger off and press it down again, then I get my second object. So Trigger once can help sort of keep your code tidy and optimized and avoid issues in certain cases. We have reached the end of our fellowship and this very long tutorial. I'm not at all sorry that it's this long. I wanted it to be detailed. I wanted to explain everything I was doing, not just do it. And I wanted it to be beginner friendly. If you'd like to see advanced dialogue system tutorials, I could do one maybe, or maybe a series of shorter videos covering different features about dialogue flow, yarn variables, conditions that check what branch you chose, all that sort of stuff. Let me know in the comments, and also any questions you might have about this video, and I'll try and help you or direct you somewhere where you can get the answers. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, thanks for your time. I hope you have fun with your dialogue system, and goodbye for now.